Hopefully you can.
Hands got this issue ready. 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 Hands got this issue ready.
Welcome. Peace, everyone. Peace, Africans. Welcome to the neocolonial function of ECOWAS and CARICOM, a joint webinar put together by the Black Alliance for Peace's Haiti Americas team and Africa team. My name is Erica Keynes, and I am the co-coordinator of the Haiti Americas team. Before we begin, I want to give some instructions for interpretation. If you can look at the bottom of your screen, you will see a symbol, like a world or globe symbol, and it says interpretation. You can click on that symbol and it will give you options to listen in for English, French, and Spanish, and you will be able to choose the appropriate language for you to be able to listen in to this webinar. So I'm going to give a moment for folks to adjust, and then I'll continue.
Bonjour et bienvenue. Je m'appelle Erika Keynes de Black Alliance for Peace, qui représente Haïti et les Amériques. Et maintenant, nous vous disons la bienvenue sur la fonction néocoloniale de la CEDEAO et de la CARICOM sur cette présentation aujourd'hui. La justice linguistique, qui signifie que chacun a le droit de communiquer dans la langue qui lui convient le mieux, est un principe auquel nous croyons. Le dialogue au-delà des différences linguistiques n'est possible que grâce à l'utilisation de stratégies visant à combler les différences de langue. Alors, veuillez cliquer sur le globe au bas de votre écran pour suivre ce webinaire dans la langue de votre choix. Autrement, vous entendrez la langue dans laquelle le présentateur, la présentatrice, s'exprimera à l'origine. Et si vous utilisez votre téléphone portable, vous allez voir 3 petits points qui est marqué plus. Vous allez pouvoir trouver l'interprétation de la langue et vous choisissez le français, l'espagnol ou l'anglais. Et vous devriez appuyer sur terminer au haut, la partie supérieure de votre écran, pour que vous puissiez accéder à la salle d'interprétation. Merci et bonne participation.
Merci. So why are we here?
Hi. Oh, hola. This part is in Spanish too. Just a moment. Thank you. Creemos en la justicia lingüística, es decir, que todo el mundo que está aquí tiene el derecho a comunicarse en el idioma en el que se sienta cómodo. Para escuchar la interpretación, haga clic en el globo situado en la parte inferior de la pantalla para escuchar este seminario en la lengua que desee. Si no lo hace, escucharía en la lengua en que hable el presentador o la presentadora, que sería en inglés o en francés. Muchas gracias y por favor déjenos saber si tienen cualquier problema con la interpretación en el chat. All right, we may begin. Thank you.
Gracias. So why are we here? As an alliance of individuals and organizations, the Black Alliance for Peace seeks to recapture and redevelop the historic anti-war, anti-imperialist, and pro-peace positions of the Black radical peace movement. At BAP, we understand that peace is not the absence of conflict, but rather the achievement by popular struggle and self-defense of a world liberated from interlocking issues of global conflict, nuclear armament and proliferation, unjust war, and subversion through the defeat of global systems of oppression that include colonialism, imperialism, patriarchy, and white supremacy. Through educational activities like this, organizing and movement support, organizations and individuals in the Alliance work to oppose both militarized domestic state repression and the policies of destabilization, subversion, and the permanent war agenda of the U.S. state globally. Myself, alongside my Africa team comrades, Yolian and Chi, are excited about this webinar kicking off Black Alliance for Peace's African Liberation Month in this crucial moment where the currents of change and challenge are converging in Africa and the Caribbean. Much of which is being pushed forward by Western, specifically U.S. interests. In Africa, we witness a dynamic landscape where the actions of NATO forces, in collaboration with regional entities like the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, are stirring both support and opposition. The protests in Niger against ECOWAS sanctions in response to the country's military transitional government's alignment with the new Alliance for Sahelian States underscore the tension surrounding African self-determination. This has led to significant decisions, with leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger opting to assert their sovereignty by departing from ECOWAS, defying historical norms and expectations. Additionally, after interference by the Supreme Court working in collusion with ECOWAS, along with then President of Senegal, Macky Sall, the African Party for Independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde government was illegally overturned. This, of course, was all in the interests of Western imperialist powers, led by the US and their French partners. Simultaneously, in the Caribbean community, CARICOM, internal political dynamics are undergoing much scrutiny, particularly concerning Haiti's relationship with the organization. The historical intricacies of Haiti's integration into CARICOM reveal deep-seated divisions, prejudices, and ongoing struggles for acceptance. CARICOM's involvement in Haitian affairs has been contentious, to say the least, notably during the 2004 coup against President Aristide. And we fast forward to today in 2024, and we witness CARICOM members, including Jamaica, supporting a US-backed, Kenyan-led intervention in Haiti. And this sparks concerns and raises questions about the organization's commitment to its principles, particularly the principle of non-interference. So both ECOWAS and CARICOM leverage soft power mechanisms such as diplomacy, economic cooperation, cultural exchange, and collaborative problem solving to enhance regional stability, prosperity, and integration. Their ability to influence regional dynamics and shape norms and values within their respective regions underscores their significance as soft power institutions in both Africa and the Caribbean. So as we gather here today with our brilliant panelists, it is imperative that we delve into these complex dynamics, exploring the intersections of regional alliances, Western interference, sovereignty insertions, historical legacies, and principles that guide our collective actions. So first, we will be hearing from Imani Umoja and Fatou Balora. Imani is a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, residing in Guinea-Bissau, Politburo of the Central Committee of the African Party of Independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, and a member of the PAIGC National Secretariat. He's also a part of the Amilcar Cabral Institute Scientific Council, coordinator of the PAIGC Dijolo, the Cambuzino section of the Autonomous Sector of Bissau, West Africa People's Organization, Coordination Council member of the Steering Committee of the Black Alliance for Peace's U.S. Out of Africa Network, and he has a GD in law from Southern University Law Center, a BS in Political Science and Public Administration from Xavier University. So we got a good one there. And Fatou is a student organizer in Burkina Faso, involved with the Thomas Sankara Center, and which is a Pan African Socialist library, and a political education center. And Fatou is also a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So, welcome to both of you.
Welcome, sister and comrade Erica.
All right. So, Imani, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
But you are both free to put on your cameras. Yeah, so I'm really excited to talk about this. And some of the things that I want to delve into is really the history and the function of ECOWAS. So Kwame Nkrumah was a staunch advocate for regionalism between independent post-colonial states developing an alliance with one another. Was the concept of regionalism as an anti-colonial tool ultimately hijacked or co-opted by ECOWAS? And why has ECOWAS failed to realize the revolutionary aspirations initially associated with regionalism?
Should I go first or Sister Comrade?
Yeah, it's for you.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you again for the opportunity to be together with you. I want to thank all the organizers, the interpreters, technicians, and all the participants. In our opinion, when ECOWAS was founded, like other regional economic organizations in Africa, like SADC in Southern Africa, etc., the reason it was a revolutionary initiative. And the reason why it was a revolutionary initiative is because the African states, and particularly in West Africa, but all over Africa, we were divided by imperialism into Balkan states. And in these Balkan states, our economic growth was very, very low. Our infrastructure was very, very bad and still is, the transportation systems. And then since you had these fake borders, you had a lot of impediments for trade. And so basically we turned into be producers of raw materials to send abroad, particularly to the north, like Europe and North America. And they would process our goods and send back the worst of our goods back to us. So it was only natural for us to seek economic integration so that we stop competing among ourselves, but as well cooperating among ourselves to make sure that the goods that we produce can be exchanged throughout. For example, in Guinea-Bissau, where I live, we export some things to Senegal, like palm oil, like lemons, etc. But we get a lot of import as well from Guinea-Conakry, a lot of fruits and vegetables, as well as from Senegal. So it's only normal for us. Additionally, it was very important for us to be able to move around freely. So by having, for example, an ECOWAS passport, we're able to go into all the 16 countries of West Africa without getting a visa. And theoretically, we're supposed to be able to move our goods. But unfortunately, when you go by road, you still have a lot of corruption, or a lot of the immigration officials still stop you or try to charge you excessive amount of money for just even buying yourself a radio or a computer. But initially, it was a very good thing. And also, when it made this transition to the political area, I guess the biggest threat to us was the fact that the neocolonial countries outnumber the revolutionary countries, even when it began. If you see they began in 1975, it was because at that time, up until 1973, the only revolutionary country in West Africa was the People's Republic of Guinea. You know, when Kwame Nkrumah was alive, you mentioned his name. Ghana was a revolutionary country up until the coup in 1966. Mali was a revolutionary country up until the coup in 1967. So Guinea-Conakry was isolated. Even to one of its border, what was called Guinea-Bissau now was called Guinea Portuguese. So it was a Portuguese colony, which they used to attack Guinea-Conakry. To the southeastern border of Guinea-Conakry, you got Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, which is really still is a French colony. They call it a French neo-colony. So it made sense that once Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde got its independence, led by the same party, the PAIGC, which had its base inside of Guinea-Conakry, had the same ideological and political structures that Guinea-Conakry, was only natural to say, okay, let's bring these three together and then try to at least make the hostile states a little less hostile, to at least go along with the ideas of having cooperation and integration. So it made sense for them to do this. In fact, I would like to recommend the comrades read Sekou Touré's book, United States of Africa. He has a whole chapter dedicated to ECOWAS, and also to read his closing speeches to some of the ECOWAS's summits. And also to remind comrades that up until his physical transition, Sekou Touré was the president of ECOWAS. And if you look at the last special summit that took place in Guinea-Conakry, it was very revolutionary. It involved the masses. At the same time, they were organizing mass organizations. They just formed a mass organization for the workers' unions, a mass organization for women and for youth. But of course, now after his fiscal disappearance, things began to change because the people did the coup against Sekou Touré also took his place inside of ECOWAS.
Thank you for that context. You mentioned the PAIGC, and I know that you represent the PAIGC, but in the context of Guinea-Bissau, how has ECOWAS's involvement in Guinea-Bissau reflect neocolonial tendencies, as you named, in West Africa, particularly in terms of political interference and influence? Can you give context to the current political situation in Guinea-Bissau?
Okay, it depends on the dynamics. It depends on the level of the pressure from the masses who organize. As we speak right now, I'm sitting by my window and I'm seeing these ECOWAS armed troops passing by. You got 650 of them, mostly from Senegal and from Nigeria. Now, they're supposed to be here to protect the institutions, to stabilize them. But in practice, that's not what they're doing. In practice, they're just protecting this neocolonial imposed so-called president, Sikoko, and not protecting the other institutions. Just to give an example, in October, there were a number of masked armed elements that surrounded the Supreme Court building and the house of the president of the Supreme Court. But this ECOWAS armed mission, which is called the Armed Stabilization Mission for Guinea-Bissau, they didn't do anything. So if they were here to protect the institutions, they would have, after the government said, it's not us, at that time it was the PAIGC was running the government, huh? The PAIGC government said, right, it's not us who sent these armed men there. They knew it was the president. So they asked the president said, no, he didn't do it. So nobody said that they were the ones who sent these armed masked men to surround the Supreme Court building and the house of the president of the Supreme Court. Then ECOWAS should have intervened. To give you another example, a month later, there was some shots firing around the National Guard building, which is close to the house of the president of the National People's Assembly. Now, he was given 2 armed elements of ECOWAS stabilization mission to protect him, but to protect the National People's Assembly. Well, when they started shooting, people thought they were shooting at his house, the house of the president. But his guard said, it's time for us to evacuate your house. So he said, well, what about the position of the ECOWAS stabilization mission? They're here with us. They said, no, our job is to, when there's shots, to hide. So they didn't do anything to protect that institution. Or I give another example, a couple of years ago, when we had another president of the National People's Assembly, when the, at that time, president of the Republic abandoned the palace, the National People's Assembly swore in the president of the National Assembly to be the temporary president of the Republic. But he began to claim that he was not being protected and he was going to resign. So they say, oh, ECOWAS, what are you going to say? We can't do anything. In situations like this, we just have to keep our mouth closed. So they're not fulfilling a mission to stabilize us. Now, there have been other times when the pressure was more on them, depending on the composition of those 15 heads of states, where they actually intervened in a positive sense. For example, when we had a struggle with the neocolonial traitor president called Jomaf Zemairevash, he sacked the government that was democratically elected and refused to give them the post. So actually, the ECOWAS did intervene positively then, and made the illegal prime minister leave office, and had the parties who have positions and who have seats in the National People's Assembly come to a consensus on who would be the interim prime minister leading up to the election. So that was positive. But overwhelmingly, the position of ECOWAS in this past few years has been negative. It's been like a neocolonial obstacle for us. Just to give another quick example, after this current imposed neocolonial president said that he was going to dissolve the National People's Assembly in December, it was pointed out that the Constitution of Guinea-Bissau does not allow the National People's Assembly to be dissolved for at least 12 months after the legislative elections. And that was only 4 months after the elections. So the Security Commission of ECOWAS met in Abuja and said that they should open up the National People's Assembly. It should not be dissolved, and they should form a new National Electoral Council because the one that is here is expired a long time ago and it's incomplete. The heads of states gave an avowal to that position, but it hasn't been implemented. Up to now, since December, up to now in May, we're still waiting on this ECOWAS commission to come here and lead the process of us forming this National Electoral Council and open up the doors to the National People's Assembly. So it's clear that there's some outside forces that are tying them up.
Thank you for providing that context, because I'm wondering, how do local perceptions of ECOWAS's soft power initiatives in Guinea-Bissau compared to regional and international assessments of their effectiveness and impact? Because you said, I think you mentioned the masses and organization making a particular difference. So I'm wondering, what is the people's thoughts on ECOWAS versus how ECOWAS is seen internationally?
I think, from my perception, the voice of the people, sometimes it varies. For example, we had a military coup d'etat in 2012. An ECOWAS mission came here, led by the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nigeria and the Minister of Defense from Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast. And even after issuing their declaration saying zero tolerance for coup d'etats, I was actually at the meeting where they said that the coup makers would have to give protection to an interim president of Guinea-Bissau who was not democratic. And I was out at that same meeting. At that time, we had what was called the stabilization mission from Angola, which we invited, which we were the overwhelming majority of the people were pleased with them because they would help us with the reform in the sectors of security and defense from Angola, which is a twin country to us. But the ECOWAS spokesperson said, no, we cannot have any Angola boots in West Africa. And they, in other words, they gave an avowal to the coup that happened in 2012. In fact, some people say they were conceived. So the majority of the people saying they should leave. But when we hear positions like that, which came out of the ECOWAS summit in December of last year, where they said they're going to send a mission here, they're going to make sure that the National People's Assembly begins to restore its democratic order and organize a new national electoral council. Then they say, okay, let them come. They're waiting for them to come. But I would say that overwhelmingly, the mass of the people in Guinea-Bissau are against the positions of ECOWAS. The overwhelming majority of the positions of ECOWAS.
So I'm wondering if you can ground the people in what neocolonialism is, right? Because we talk about a neocolonial function of ECOWAS, but to what extent does ECOWAS's approach to conflict resolution in Guinea-Bissau and elsewhere align with or challenge accusations of neocolonialism, considering factors such as sovereignty, democratic principles, and even regional stability?
Well, neocolonialism is a situation where it appears as though the country is independent. It has its own flag. It has a president, a presidential palace was born in that country. It has its national hymn. But the economy, in fact, is controlled by outsiders. In the case of West Africa, the majority of the economy is controlled by France and to a large extent by US imperialism. With ECOWAS, unfortunately, of the 16 countries that were founders of ECOWAS, the overwhelming majority were French colonies. At that time, they were called independent, but in fact, they were neocolonies, like Senegal, Mauritania, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, etc. They're countries where it's not the people of that country who made the conceptions on how the economy would run, on their military, on their sectors of defense and security. It's actually the outsider force to do that. So when you get ready to go into a meeting like the ECOWAS summit, those neo-colonial puppets, those who are controlled by the imperialist force, and when I say imperialism, that's to say those forces of capitalist exploitation who leave their national boundaries and come to another place to control that area. For example,
So the area, Brother Imani, I'm sorry. Can you speak a little slower for the interpreters?
No problem. For example, France is a capitalist country. It exploits the workers of France. Now, when they cross their borders into Africa, Asia, and Latin America, or the islands, they go with military force. They set up their administration. They have their military and their police, and they put their own economy there where they take the resources out of that country, for example, Senegal or Mali or Guinea-Conakry. They take those resources out of the country to France where they sell it to other places in the world. So the people of the host country, Senegal or Mali or Cote d'Ivoire, they have the land, they provide the labor, but it's the outside forces who decide what they grow, what they produce, and what the price will be, and then use their own labor, exploit their own labor to do that. And they inflict violence on the people. And they even try to change the culture of the people, which they cannot do, but they try to force their languages on the people there. But if you look at most countries in West Africa, maybe about 10% of the people in those countries speak French. So what happens is, by them having control over the political actors in places like Senegal, Mali, or Cote d'Ivoire, then when we organize organizations like ECOWAS or the African Union, they tell their puppets In the case of Senegal, Lipar Senghor, or later on Abdou Diouf, they tell them what to do, what to say, and what not to do. They still control the money there. In these countries, they're still using the French franc, what they call the CFA, which is it used to be called the franc for French African colonies. But after sham independence, they changed the name of the C to be franc for the French African communities. But it's the same money. It's still the value is decided by France. So now when France left the French franc and went to the European euro, now this CFA is now pegged to the euro, which means that the people in France decide on the economies of these countries in West Africa, and also tell you that whenever you want to exploit some of your natural resources, you have to give France the first choice. So that's how neocolonialism basically works. And even in the schools, those few that go to school, they try to corrupt the history so they can make the people in these countries believe that our history began when they arrived. They try to make us think that the things in their land and their culture are beautiful and the things of our culture are ugly. So that we'll have an inferiority complex. So what happens is a lot of our students want to go study in France, in the countries that were colonized by France. If they're colonized by England, like Ghana or Nigeria, then they want to go to, or Gambia, they want to go to England to go to school. Instead of going to school in our country where we have a lot of universities. So in a nutshell, they use our people and our resources to develop their lands. The development of France, the development of England, the development of Canada or US caused the underdevelopment of Africa. And they're afraid that with development of Africa, it will cause the underdevelopment of France, of Britain, of US, and others like them.
Thank you so much, Imani. I'm going to segue now to Fatou.
Fatou?
Yeah, I don't know if Fatou is ready. Fatou, if you're ready, you can turn your camera on.
Désolée, camarade, j'avais perdu ma connexion.
All right. Welcome back, Fatou. So you are in Burkina Faso, and I know
Sorry, I
there's
had lost my connection, says Miss Fatou.
Yeah, no problem. You are in Burkina Faso, which there's a lot of news and reporting coming out of the Sahelian states. So I wanted to know.
Un instant pour l'interprétation, je n'ai pas encore pu.
1 second, so that I need to go into the interpretation. Give us just a second.
No problem.
Je vois pas, je sais pas comment ça se passe. Je vois pas le globe.
Alors, c'est Rose qui parle, Madame Fatou. Alors, si vous allez voir, vous n'avez pas vu le globe? Vous voyez 3 petits points, peut-être? Si vous allez sur les 3 petits points, vous allez voir interprétation et vous choisissez le français. Très bien. Vous êtes là?
Oui, c'est bon.
Très bien, merci. Très bien.
Are we ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start again.
I apologize. I'm not sure if Fatou is ready.
Okay.
I don't think she can hear us. 1 second, please. Fatou, est-ce que vous êtes prête? Vous nous entendez sur l'interprétation?
Ah oui, oui, je vous entends.
Oui, mais vous
Maintenant,
m'entendez
il
sur
faut
la
que
salle principale.
Oui, j'essaie de couper le truc.
Est-ce que vous avez déjà sélectionné l'interprétation en français?
Oui, 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 oui.
Très bien. Donc, je vais
Ok,
maintenant passer à la salle. Donc, vous allez me répondre dans la salle.
d'accord.
Merci.
Oui,
And
c'est
just
bon,
bear with
c'est bon.
us. All right.
Okay, we're ready.
All right. You know, Africa's not free yet, so we got a little service interruptions every now and again. But Fatou is in Burkina Faso, and there's a lot of
Exactly.
news and headlines coming out of Burkina Faso and the Sahelian region in general. So I wanted to know, Fatou, to what extent does the emergence of the Alliance of Sahelian States reflect a power dynamic with ECOWAS and regional aspirations in West Africa, particularly in terms of sovereignty and autonomy?
D'accord. C'est bon. C'est bon maintenant? D'accord. Je sais pas, peut-être que j'ai pas bien compris la question.
Maybe I'm not sure if I understood the question. If you could, I'm gonna try to send a response, but I think that the alliance of the Sahel in terms of the sovereignty is an example. It's an example for all these African countries that are that are aspiring for this liberation. I would say based on the decisions that are operational that these countries have been trying to function, and especially the relationship that they've actually built in terms of the multipolarity, we can see that there's a hope for the region and for the subregions. And also there's this hope for the other countries, the African countries, that can see that there's this possibility to have better relationships, especially with like France, with the US, and the possibility to go to China and to go to Russia and other countries that have this vision that are non-imperialist. And I think that would probably give a different direction to this African liberation, because we cannot forget that we're trying to liberate Africa, but we don't want to unify Africa on the base of an imperialist type of style. And we want to have a sovereignty that will take advantage of that's going to be for the advantage of our people. And this question of the EAS is that we think that it's a good example, so that we can see it's an example of auto-determination, and to really have this conscientious way to see that we understand that this all that we've gone through, and we need to get to a better life for the people in Africa, for Africa.
Let's see. So we talked a little bit about soft power with Imani, and I mentioned it in the introduction, but one way to understand soft power is the prevalence of NGOs. How does the formation of the AES impact ECOWAS's soft power strategies like NGOs and its ability to project influence and cooperation within the region?
Désolée, peut-être je ne comprends pas bien le soft power. Pouvez-vous traduire ça en français? Pouvoir du peuple ou pouvoir institutionnel? Pouvoir du peuple? Oui, je vous entends. Oui, oui. Oui. Pouvez-vous répondre?
Erica, pourriez-vous, sorry, Erica, would you please restate the question, please?
Yeah, we talked about soft power in ECOWAS and ECOWAS being a soft power institution. So how does the formation of the AES impact ECOWAS's soft power strategies like NGOs and policies, and its ability to project influence and cooperation in that region? Like, is there, I guess, more simple, I can ask, is there a struggle with the people and NGOs happening in the region?
Déjà, vous le constatez, les ONG, c'est
First, you will see that the NGOs, we can say that it's sort of like this imperialist control that's like really hidden in terms of like the debt, for example. The vision of the OS is that it's apologize. The vision of the AES is that it's this vision of this imperialism, which means the relationship, the place of the NGOs is like basically they're constantly being challenged. And there are some NGOs that are more that we're actually we're looking at them, we're surveilling them. If we have to go to the question of the ECOWAS, as you could see, it's kind of like an organization. It's an economic organization that really is working in a way to be able to give this economic dynamics, but it's really converted into this more political organization so that they can keep putting their thumb on these countries, on these regions. And when we look at the ECOWAS, all these countries that are within the ECOWAS, all these head of governments that are there, they're basically exactly that. They are puppets. They're puppets, like we could say Macky Sall, for example. You see, all these people, these are people who are really puppets that are placed in their country, in these that are placed there by the capitalist other head of states. So they're basically serving their own interest. Once they are there, they're in this sort of like, they're in this situation where you could see that the ECOWAS is really being managed from the external gaze. we have those head of states of Africa that are making decisions for the betterment for their country. But really, we know that those decisions that are being taken by the ECOWAS are not really decisions that are made by the African head of state. It's not even for the people, the betterment of the people. It's really for the interest of those others, countries that are capitalist. So the path that the AES is taking is basically, it's a radical path to put them in a place where we're going to confront like some of the cases that they're actually trying to pose against us. And we can see some of the sanctions that they're actually putting on the AES. When we take off like the case of the wars, the ECOWAS wanted to bring Bazoum back on the power. This was one of the decisions that didn't have any advantage for the Nigerian people, and also for the members of these countries, because there's going to be forces from Niger, and there's a lot of, and we can see that the population is going to be affected economically and even physically, and there's going to be a lot of death and a lot of victims, and they did not want to lose the Niger, and they would rather destroy the Niger instead of actually trying to help. And so all these things, you know, we're going to be able to see what they're actually up to. And we have this sovereignty and this independence that we can have our own decision without being affected negatively. I think that the departure of the ECOWAS is kind of like linked to that. The ECOWAS is being used like an instrument to stop the struggle of the liberation of those people.
I see. So what is the general perception of the AES leaving ECOWAS? I know you just spoke to how positive that would be, but how do the people feel about it? And what does this mean for the function of regional alliances more broadly as a form of anti-imperialist resistance?
I think for the people have tried to engage themselves in this process. It's not a unification like between like the different heads of state. Like we can see like the ECOWAS really, when we look at the ECOWAS, we could see like, these are a bunch of summits that are being done in France and other places. They're making decisions without really implicating the people. But when we look at like they don't really take the big decisions. And when you look at the AS, basically the people actually make the decision with the AES. So this is the process that actually, it means that basically the mass of the people can be implicated with the AES, but it's not like we don't have like a popular government or socialist government, but it's a process. when you look at like the people, they are constantly engaged in terms of defending the Burkina, or we have a lot of we're organizing, and we can say, okay, my country is being attacked, and I have to take up arms so that I can defend my country. We have the case of people, for example, we have people from the Burkinabe who have decided to organize themselves, like to have a cell. They go to different specific areas that are strategic from the different parts of the country so that they can prevent the country from being attacked. Because you could see the attacks will not come from outside. A lot of times they're internal. The imperialists have always used the people inside of the country. And especially, they're always going to try to go this route, because that's what they've done for 30 years. We can see all these countries that are revolutionary countries. When they want to have a different direction for their country, it's always from the inside that the coup is happening. So we have these youth, they understand, and they decide to organize themselves to defend their country one way or another. And beyond that, there's also the national popular organizations that are really helping the Burkinabe so that they can actively participate in the in putting together like maybe manufacturing industries, and also work with the farmers. All of this to say that the mass actually they're aware, and they are demanding even more activities than we have right now. So we do have hope.
Thank you so much, Fatou. Thank you, Imani. We will bring you both back on later in the program for a general Q&A with the audience, but I appreciate both of you for offering that context on ECOWAS. So next, we will move forward to our CARICOM panel with Tamanisha John and Peter J. Hudson. Thank you, Nafa. Tamanisha is an assistant professor in the Department of Politics at York University. Tamanisha studies Caribbean development, sovereignty and politics, as well as Canadian foreign policy, economic imperialism, financial exclusion, and corporate power. She has published about the Caribbean in leading peer-reviewed journals, including Class, Race, and Corporate Power, the Review of Radical Political Economy, and Social and Economic Studies, and has written about the Caribbean and publicly in the Black Agenda Report, The Conversation, the Council of Hemispheric Affairs, and her comments. And Peter Hudson is the author of Bankers and Empire, How Wall Street Colonized the Caribbean, and a member of the Black Alliance for Peace, Haiti America's team. So welcome to you both. I am going to start with Tamanisha.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Of course. I couldn't think of a better person to give context to the history of CARICOM, because we wanted to know what are the challenges of such regional alliances in the present day. So what is CARICOM, and then what does CARICOM represent today?
So I will be speaking and then they translate after, correct?
I believe they'll be translating as you speak, and it's
yes,
separate
simultaneous.
But just speak slowly, I think is the request.
Okay, thank you. So CARICOM, I think most people know it today as the quote unquote Caribbean community. And even though it's known as being a part of the, or it's thought of as the Caribbean community, it mostly focuses on Caribbean economic competition between states in the region and how they can compete friendly with each other in the region for investments. And it also allows them to push forward or facilitate a sort of common foreign policy and economic outlook agenda for the region. I think that most people believe that CARICOM is a integrating institution in the region when it's not necessarily the case or the function for CARICOM. And so prior to what we know of CARICOM today, there was this plan in the Caribbean region to create a West Indian Federation, which would sort of unite states in the region to pose a viable force against economic and foreign control, because the states saw themselves as too small to, too small if they stood by themselves to try to compete in the global capitalist system after independence. And so the dreams of the West Indian Federation was more so, how can we unite economically for sort of progress and development in our region? And a big part of that question was who had economic control in the region. And I think that those conversations more so deaded themselves, since you had a lot of corporate interests in the Caribbean region from former colonial powers who didn't want to get rid of that power. And so there were big behind the scenes lobbying and political efforts by colonial corporations to ensure that West Indian Federation would not happen. From that, though, there were different free trade deals and free trading agreements that states had with each other. And I'm trying to say this in a very simpler way versus being too technical, just so that people can understand. But you had this dream of federation that failed. Then you had these trade deals, trade agreements, and trade treaties that were lifted up. And that is essentially what CARICOM comes out of. It comes from this failed dream of integration to how can we then compete with each other on friendly terms? And that competition is for Western foreign investments. And so it essentially is pitting countries against each other, but saying that we're still friendly or will maintain friendly diplomatic relations with each other as we all compete for Western foreign investment into our countries and our states. And so when we talk about CARICOM in the present, CARICOM is a vehicle for states to attract Western investment in the Caribbean region in friendlier ways so that they are not hostile to each other as they compete for Western foreign investment. Not only that, but CARICOM is also a vehicle for them to collaborate on economic policy and foreign policy with each other in light of the Western foreign investment that they achieve. The title of this webinar is, the function or the neocolonial function of ECOWAS and CARICOM. And often when we talk about neocolonialism, what jumps out more quickly is sort of this political aspect without economic independence, meaning that people are governed by those who look like them or who may be perceived as being a part of them. But essentially their post of governance serves to legitimize exploitative and status quo economic and social relations. And there are slight improvements in the social relations, or there are more improvements in the social relations than the economic ones, but there is still discrimination largely aimed at those who were the most marginalized under the colonial situation. And so an important part of neocolonialism, especially when we talk about CARICOM, is the continued sort of collaborative networks of repression, especially through policing, borders, security, and the relationship between wagers or workers in the Caribbean and the industries that they tend to work in. And so CARICOM collaborates on foreign policy and economic policy, and all of that collaboration is mostly targeted in how can we attract foreign investment. And so linked together, I like to tell people that CARICOM is an entity that just should not exist, because it is a way for the West to continue to exert substantive diplomatic economic and political control in states under the guise of investment and development. And I think in the present, obviously, when we talk about Haiti and people are saying, oh, CARICOM is supporting intervention in Haiti, what's really being made apparent is the fact that in asking for or in begging for Western foreign investment, what you essentially have is a regional organization beholden to Western financial, political, and security interests in a region. And sort of the unity that states have are dependent on how well they collaborate with those interests. And I think that that's also made more apparent when we hear current conversations about the Dominican Republic, for instance, joining CARICOM, or other states joining CARICOM that were previously left out. People claimed for discriminatory measures or those different types of things, but as investments go into the Dominican Republic in security to keep Haitians out, now they are a viable partner for CARICOM.
Thank you for that context. You kind of maybe answered a few of the questions that I was going to ask, but I think you can give maybe more.
Podemos responder algunas de las otras preguntas.
Because I'm interested in how has CARICOM's governance structure enabled neocolonial interests? I know you talked about being beholden to Western powers, but how does this dominate decision-making processes within the organization? If you can speak to that a little more specifically.
So typically when you have regional institutions or regional collaborations that are happened in states, not just in the Caribbean, but also in South America, or even the case that we see on the African continent or in Europe, they typically come out of an agreement or an alignment that we want to strengthen our region, or have our region be from a position of strength. I think that this is very important to point out, because when we look at CARICOM, the West Indian Federation failed precisely due to corporate interests that did not want to see any sort of regional institution prosper that was facilitated on strengthening the region, precisely because the region acted and currently acts as a vehicle for Western corporations and capitalists to exploit. And I think that this is important in talking about the founding and the functioning of CARICOM, because what you essentially have are people who are elected as prime ministers within Caribbean states, who are also then given voices or have positions in CARICOM, where they are best looking on how to facilitate the continuous neocolonial exploitation in their countries in ways that don't upset their neighbors. And I think that this is a very important distinction, because in CARICOM itself, you never had sort of the conversations that you've seen in other sort of regional organizations, like how are we going to, or what currencies are we going to use, or what currency facilitation will be like between us? Are we going to create any sort of regional economic standard for ourselves? You don't really see CARICOM having those kinds of conversations. Instead, CARICOM as a vehicle acts as, I don't know, I guess you can say like a non-governmental organization, which is how best can we attract money to ourselves and make sure that that money remains constant to us. And so CARICOM in that light is just a vehicle of dependence. How do we maintain dependence on sort of these foreign investments that we have? And in order to maintain them, then you don't necessarily see innovative ideas being pushed for what states in the region as a region can do to, again, facilitate prosperity or development that people would, think about when they think about the something like the European Union or other entities that I see people try to falsely compare CARICOM to. And so in a sense, I would say that CARICOM's strongest point is in this sort of diplomatic function that is more front-facing for more people, or to more people who analyze the institution, because it allows Caribbean leaders to come together to talk to each other set out statements or put out statements and reports on the region, on issues that they view as vital or claim to be vital to the region. However, as an institution itself, like CARICOM, to me, it is just defunct. Like, it denies members sovereignty if it suits, for instance, Western investments into the region. People complain, or people like to say in the present as a gotcha, oh, there should be visa-free travel for members in CARICOM, but you frequently see CARICOM members denying Haitians or being discriminatory towards Haitian entry into their region, or setting barriers on Haitian entry into their region. And again, this goes back to the function of CARICOM. If CARICOM is just an investment conduit for the West, it's going to repress the most repressed labor within its unit. And if that is the Haitian laborer, then you can expect these nonsensical requirements on Haitian movement. Prior to Guyana finding oil, you also saw some same limited discriminatory measures towards Guyanese, because they were seen as people who go to other countries to make more money than they could in Guyana. Now, with the finding of oil, Guyanese migrants are sort of elevated in the sense that people want to make oil connections with those migrants. And so again, CARICOM is an entity that uplifts Western investment, and in uplifting Western investment, you're uplifting Caribbean dependence on Western investment and all of the negative social and economic relations that come with it for people in the Caribbean itself. We can even think about now, when you have the genocide that's occurring in Palestine, you now have more Caribbean states agreeing to recognize Palestine and Israel's occupation in Palestine. However, this was always something that Caribbean people themselves have wanted and believed in. To explain the lag in sort of governance or governments recognizing Palestine in CARICOM, it is also to point out that they were towing a foreign policy line, again in line with the West, but now given people pressure, regional pressure, and obviously the contradiction as former colonial entities themselves, which gained independence some 50 years ago, 50 or less, depending on the country, that contradiction is too clear and blatant for them not to ignore. Similar with states like Barbados, getting rid of the monarchy only a couple years ago, when it became politically and also socially, given the news, suspicious not to do so. And so I feel as if I've lost wind of what the initial question was, but CARICOM as a regional entity, it's false to claim it as a regional entity. It's a conduit of Western investment. It's more close to a non-governmental organization than sort of a regional institution focused on regional development and progress for member states.
Thank you. And I'm just going to ask one more question before I get to Peter. In what ways does CARICOM's alignment with Western powers and the corporations like you name, how does it impact its ability to address economic inequalities, environmental challenges, and even imperialism within the Caribbean region, specifically Haiti?
Mm-hmm. So as an entity that is dependent on Western investment and that carries out backwards economics and social policies to maintain that investment, I don't believe that CARICOM is an institution that can effectively address imperialism. And I say this because you have people who celebrate or elevate CARICOM's call for reparations, for instance. But what would reparations to CARICOM look like, or for CARICOM member states look like, as they are dependent on Western capitalists? A lot of that would mean that reparations money, if reparations is money that goes into CARICOM states, will then be siphoned off to Western corporations that dominate the economic structures in these states. So it will not be for Caribbean people or stay in the Caribbean to develop the Caribbean. CARICOM cannot address issues of climate change. It cannot address issues effectively of unemployment or innovation within their own societies as long as they are embedded, I guess, or tied to maintaining Western investments in their countries, which means uplifting those same corporations that rob Caribbean states of capital. And not only rob Caribbean states of capital now, but also that would be there in the future. A lot of people also say, well, maybe reparations are diaspora going back and investing in their countries. But if you are a member of the diaspora and you want to invest in businesses in your country, a lot of those businesses are not owned by people who live in your country either. And so until CARICOM is honest to Caribbean people and saying that there has to be some rejection of the capitalist system or a rejection of the Western corporate control of the entire economic sector in these countries, CARICOM cannot claim that it wants to develop the Caribbean or that it can effectively address imperialism or even that it can address this question of pushing back Western cultural capture in the country. CARICOM, for instance, cannot even address the fact that something like Carnival, which, you know, got its rise given histories of rebellion, political independence, etc., is now commodified and captured to the point that many regular Caribbean people cannot participate in bands in their own country's carnival. So it cannot address issues of culture, which we always say are sort of the low issues for any society to address. Then how can we claim it can address issues of, can address economic issues, bigger political or bigger social issues? Again, it would just be a lie. CARICOM had long outlived its usefulness as soon as it was created in rejection of actual West Indian Federation. And today you don't have any CARICOM state or any CARICOM member state that is actively pushing for integration in the real sense. Instead, they are maintaining a dependent line wherein they are begging for Western investment and thus pushing Western foreign policy interests, including security interests, on member states in the region. And so again, CARICOM is just not an institution to me that should exist because it is how it allows Western foreign policy interest and interest in capital to run rampant to the detriment of people that live in the Caribbean.
Thank you so much, Tamanisha.
You're welcome.
Next, I want to speak with Peter Hudson. Peter, you've written a fantastic book called Bankers and Empire, How Wall Street Colonized the Caribbean. And, you know, Tamanisha just gave some context to it, but I do want to speak about the historical and present day context about these trade agreements and partnerships with Western entities and how they contribute to reinforcing this neocolonial economic.
Well, first of all, good morning from the West Coast. It's kind of early for some of us out here. And I want to say thank you to you, Erica, and to BAP for organizing this, and a massive thank you to all the interpreters involved in here. And I think, of course, we should acknowledge the terrible genocide in Gaza. And even though this webinar is not about Palestine, I think that the issues of imperialism and white supremacy that undergird the problems of the Caribbean and Africa also go through Gaza. I want to begin by saying I think there's very good reasons for forming regional alliances like CARICOM, though I think, as Tamanisha said, not necessarily CARICOM. In the context of the Caribbean, obviously, there's the size of the islands, both in terms of geography and demography, but also the scale or size of the economics of the island. So it makes sense, to find a kind of potential strength in unity, especially in the context of being adjacent to larger imperial powers of Europe, and of course the United States, but also Canada. And I think we can look at organizations like CARICOM and also have to acknowledge that there's other histories of regionalism, of progressive regionalisms that were developed in the Caribbean. We had the Antillean Federation of the Puerto Rican Ramon Betances, and also the Confederation of the Antilles by Joseph Antenor Firme. And I think if we could also extend this and acknowledge that many of the great Pan-African thinkers, for good reason, came out of the Caribbean, whether it's Martin Delaney of St. Thomas, George Padmore and Kwame Ture of Trinidad, Walter Rodney, T. Ras McConan of Guyana, and the great Marcus Garvey of Jamaica. I mean, I think that their experiences, Caribbean peoples, gave them a kind of vision of a Pan-African world. So it makes sense in some ways to try to create organizations or infrastructures that stretch across the region. It makes sense to try to develop a certain form of uniformity around trade and commerce. It makes sense to try to encourage educational exchange and a kind of uniformity of education through institutions like a University of the West Indies. It makes sense to develop efficiencies around communication, around transportation, and around security. It also makes sense to think about this importantly in terms of labor. And I think, as Tamanisha pointed out, this is a major issue for the Caribbean region and for CARICOM. Of course, there's impediments to this unification. You're dealing with a variety of internal political systems. You're dealing with different models of economic development. You're dealing with different forms of nationalism and island rivalry. And you're, of course, dealing with external forces of imperialism that are going to try to shape the kind of internal debates of the Caribbean as a region, but also of various islands and countries as a whole. And so, as Tamanisha pointed out, if we look at CARICOM, we have to look back to the post-World War II formation of the West Indian Federation. And I think I would differ a little bit from Tamanisha in terms of talking about the failure of West Indian Federation. And I would say that, first of all, yes, that the idea of federation in the Anglophone Caribbean, and we are speaking specifically here about the British West Indies, and we're not talking about Cuba or the Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico or Haiti at this point. This comes out of an idea of British imperial management for their former colonies in the region as they saw the empire slowly breaking up under World War II. How can you manage a region, maintain colonial ties, when you're very much aware that these countries are trying to head towards some form of nominal independence? But the failure of this was not merely a kind of pushback against corporate interests. It was a failure because of nationalisms. You had countries like Jamaica, first of all, and then Trinidad, who had the largest populations in the British West Indies and the largest economies of the British West Indies, not really wanting to share a piece of the regional spoils with the smaller countries like Barbados. One of the fundamental issues, again, was labor. And in the post-war period, there was a question of freedom of movement. Could nationals from one country freely move to other countries? At that time, the issue was with Trinidad, which was one of the richer countries that had a lot of available land, not wanting to accept Barbadian migrants Barbados is a smaller economy with a landless workforce who would want to come to Trinidad. The Trinis didn't want the Bayesians effectively. And then we see this replicated today in terms of what's happening with Haiti. Now, when we get to CARICOM, in some ways, as Tamanisha pointed out, this is really a scaled back version of the West Indies Federation. I think we also have to acknowledge that this time we're not necessarily dealing with the kind of legacies of British imperialism to the same degree as we're dealing with the rise of the United States as the dominant power in the Caribbean after the Second World War. And of course, with that, we have to look at the kind of growth of U.S. power in the region from the 19th century. What's extremely important here is the strategic need of the Caribbean to the United States commercial interests. And this really hinges on the Panama Canal and the kind of shipping lanes to the Panama Canal, which opens in 1915, but the U.S. basically creates the nation of Panama in 1804. And today, I think we can look at three kind of issues around that, and I'll try to get back to the question of trade in a second here, Erica. First of all, we have to look, when we're talking about CARICOM and the existence of CARICOM, vis-a-vis its relationship to the United States and U.S. empire, in relationship to Cuba, and especially Cuba after 1959, and the threat of a socialist state in the region, the threat of Soviet influence in the region, which becomes paramount with the revolution in Grenada in 1981. But it's also striking that even as early as 1961, Eric Williams, the first prime minister of Trinidad, in an interview in the British press said, Cuba will hold the West Indies together. And it's a kind of ambivalent statement that he's making about Cuba, which is to suggest that it's almost an anti-Castro, anti-Cuban statement to say, well, we need federation, we need British West Indies Federation, otherwise Cuba will create something. And I think the example of Grenada kind of spurs that fear. The second thing we have to look at is CARICOM's relationship to Haiti. And what's important here, that with the discussions of Haiti's relationship to CARICOM is, again, not just a question of labor, but the idea dating back to the 1970s that Haiti could be a market for goods from the rest of the Caribbean, so that there was a really instrumentalist view of Haiti. And I think now the final thing we have to look at is CARICOM's relationship to Venezuela and the anxiety around Venezuela's resources and around the Bolivarian revolution to U.S. strategy in the region, which is, I think, potentially coming to a very dangerous head right now as there's a kind of belligerence between Guyana and Haiti, with Irfan Ali leading that line. And of course, the issue with everyone here is not just strategy, but oil. And so I'll leave it. Well, I guess, and then the question then in terms of trade, and I'll just be brief here. For me, is two things. One is CARICOM, I think, as Tamanisha has pointed out, becomes the conduit for North American and European capital to control Caribbean resources. This is made most clearly, I think, in the terrible negotiations that the Guyanese government made with Exxon to cede the profits from its offshore oil refineries to Exxon. But we also can see it, I think, in terms of the desires of U.S. occupation of Haiti are not simply for strategic reasons, but also, I think, to control Haitian labor and to control Haitian resources. And so the only way I think that one can reverse that kind of use of CARICOM as a certain kind of conduit for capitalist trade relations is if Caribbean countries embark on a non-capitalist path of development that rejects out of hand a kind of dominance of North American and European capital in the region.
Thank you. We have not that much time left, and I do want to give a time for at least one question that was not addressed at all. So I'm just going to ask one final question to you, Peter, because this is important for the Haiti Americas team. Because we've all talked about Haiti. I think we've given context on the relationship between CARICOM and Haiti. But more specifically, I wanted to talk about CARICOM's justification in its participation in military training exercises with Western imperialist states, like with Operation Trade Winds, while simultaneously aligning with the CELAC Declaration of a Zone of Peace, which advocates for demilitarization and peaceful conflict resolution in the region. You really only have maybe like 3 minutes. But I know that you are the best to ask that question too, so I'll stop.
Yeah, I'll be as brief and succinct as I can. I would say that we have to step back from understanding the global, or excuse me, the zone of peace and CELAC's declaration of the zone of peace, and understand that effectively the zone of peace is undermined by the Global Fragilities Act. And the Global Fragilities Act, as you know, the Black Alliance for Peace and Black Agenda Review has taught us, is a new kind of global vision of U.S. Policy that has located certain countries in Africa and the Caribbean, specifically Haiti, as sites for strategic dominance in order to use as a kind of fulcrum to control the region and strategically and economically. So I think then, you know, those countries who are making kind of claims about a zone of peace are effectively hypocrites if they do so without addressing and asking for the abolition of the Global Fragilities Act.
Thank you so much. We can get all the panelists back on the screen for today. I deeply, deeply appreciate Imani and Fatou and Tamanisha and Peter for really grounding, I think, the conversation that we've not had at all. And shout out to Jamima in the back. But yeah, I don't think there's enough conversation around ECOWAS and CARICOM. But one of the questions, because a lot of the questions that were in the Q&A, you all spoke to, Peter, you just so happened to speak to Cuba and CARICOM's relationship. We talked about a bit about the function or how ECOWAS functions in the
Slow
Sahel.
down a little bit. Sorry.
How it functions in the Sahel. But one of the questions that was asked specifically was, can you speak to Pan-Africanism? And I think I would like to speak about that in the context, because the question is about Pan-Africanism and North African countries not involved, but in the context of Haiti and this occupation being seen as a quote unquote Pan-African occupation. Can each of you speak to how you envision Pan-Africanism in the context of ECOWAS and CARICOM? And 2 minutes each, please, if possible.
I guess I'll start. I would say a couple of things. First of all, I want to acknowledge that the CARICOM 10-point reparations plan on paper is an incredible document, and that people should really use it. And what part of what makes it a really great document is that it has a Pan-African vision to it. Unfortunately, I think that, as again Tamanisha pointed out, that vision of the reparation plan is going to be undermined by a kind of neoliberal ideology that I think it will govern its implementation. But when it comes to the question of Kenya participating in a so-called Pan-African force, this is merely the most kind of insipid and nasty form of Pan-African coonery, if we could call it that. It's absolutely an insult to the legacies of the great Pan-Africanists of the 19th and 20th century, and to both Caribbean and African people. This has nothing to do with global Black unity, global African unity, or progressive forces. This is merely about using Black people, Black faces as the cover for neo-colonial and neoliberal interventions in the region for the kind of individual profits of certain politicians. And I think the individual profits of whether, not just profits, but careers of people like William Ruto, Mia Motley, and Irfan Ali. It'll be very interesting to see where all of those politicians end up after this this occupation, and it'd be very interesting to monitor their Swiss bank accounts as this occupation carries on.
Thank you. And you all are free to reply.
Erica,
Yes.
are we responding just to
Yes,
the question?
you are.
Okay, the question about why it appears as though Africans in North Africa is not involved in the Pan-African movement.
Yes.
Oh, okay, well, it's probably because of the lack of information. I would like to encourage all of the listeners and participants to do more research on the role of Libya in Pan-Africanism, Egypt during the time of Ness, and even now you have Pan-African organizations operating out of Egypt, as well as even in Morocco, with all of some of the social discrimination that might be going on, that is going on there. That I want you all to know that the PAIGC, along with the MPLA of Angola, Frelimo of Mozambique, MSCP out of Saint Tomé, they had their office called CONCP, the Conference of Nationalist Organizations in Portuguese Colonies, which was a Pan-African instrument coordinated military struggle. It was housed inside of Morocco. So I think it's just a lack of information. You know, they try to divide us all the time. So the ones that think, you know, the North Africa is white Africa and the rest of Africa is black, it's not true. So they're very involved. And I agree with also what Comrade Peter said about trying to move Africans from Kenya to go be their servants in Haiti. It's not new either. They used to do that even inside of Africa, take Africans out of Cape Verde to go.
Brother, I'm sorry. We got to speak a little slow. We're in a dichotomy where we're time crunch, but yet also the interpreters need to be able to interpret. So if you can try, I'm sorry, to try to speak slower.
I was trying to get it all in 2 minutes. But the truth of the matter is that Africans in North Africa are very much involved in the Pan-African Revolution. It's just a lack of information and misinformation.
I also will pass or cede my time on that question so that other questions could be asked or people can have more time.
That was actually the one question that was not touched on. Actually, there is a specific question for you, Tamanisha, about the contrast between CARICOM and ALBA.
So in the Q&A, it says, how would Comrade Tamanisha compare and contrast CARICOM with ALBA? So they are asking how I would contrast and pair, you know, CARICOM is this Caribbean community and ALBA, which is the Bolivarian Alliance. So as a conduit of Western interest, I would say that CARICOM suffers from being able to come up with solutions for Caribbean people and even for development and progress in the region, precisely because as a conduit that is dependent on Western capital and thus has to proliferate Western interest by begging for investment, it cannot address questions of underdevelopment, exploitation, capitalism or imperialism effectively. This is not the case for ALBA or the Bolivarian Alliance, given that they have a much more clear-minded understanding of Western imperialism, given the members that make up the alliance. So in this, whereas CARICOM focuses on attracting Western investments and maintaining a dependent situation within their states, I would say that ALBA is mostly focused on recognizing what undergirds underdevelopment and exploitation in the region. So there's this recognition of imperialism, and also this recognition that the liberal Western capitalist system wants them to remain dependent on it. So again, that sort of situation. And so ALBA focuses on economic cooperation. So again, not economic competition or trying to attract strictly Western foreign investment, but it focuses more on economic cooperation and reciprocity. So for instance, a lot of people, when they hear ALBA today, they think about agreements or deals like Petro-Caribe, for instance. It is also the case that you have some CARICOM states that are members of CARICOM who are also in ALBA. And when you see what they say in ALBA, it's a lot different than what they say in CARICOM. So for instance, if you look at ALBA, you have states like St. Lucia saying that we should not go and intervene in Haiti. There should be no armed intervention in Haiti. But then when you look at CARICOM, you have it where like our member states agree that there should be intervention in Haiti. I pointed out that you have a lot more Caribbean states recognizing Palestine, but CARICOM as an entity, it usually releases all of these big statements as it deals with intervening in Haiti, but they quietly agreed that member states should recognize Palestine if the US is to be believed that they want a two-state solution, right? And so this is what it means that CARICOM is just like co-opted and subsumed to these interests, and ALBA is not. It is also the case that CARICOM states, we champion them in the present because they always recognize Cuba's sovereignty. And so they want the blockade against Cuba to end. However, that was a recognition that was had in the region since prior to CARICOM's existence even. And these were just states saying, wait a minute, we recently got our independence after the US is invading Cuba, Bay of Pigs. We want to make sure that our own sovereignties can't be trampled on. And so we recognize Cuba. And this is prior to CARICOM being the entity that we know it today. And I think that if it was changed, like CARICOM came first, I don't believe that those states would maintain this stance on recognizing Cuba's sovereignty. And so that's why I am saying on this panel that I believe CARICOM has outlived its usefulness. I don't think it was that useful to begin with, since again, it's always been subservient to Western corporate interests. And while those nationalisms did exist, depending on which countries were more developed, I also think it's important to talk about how economic structures in states influence nationalism in states. So it is not the case that Trinidadians themselves were rich and the Trinidadian people were just nationalistic and wanted to keep other Caribbean workers out. It's that the rich corporate owners in Trinidad played a role in elevating that nationalism, saying, you all will get less if you allow this to come. And I think that that's very important to remember, especially because today you see some people saying like, oh, Caribbean integration can't happen because the Jamaicans are too prideful, or people just hate Haitians, da, da, da. All of that stems from a history of enforcing divisions within the region, precisely so that you can have states that view each other as competitors. Even if they're friendly competitors, it's still a very antagonistic mindset or relationship that is created from the colonial situation and maintained throughout, precisely so that integration can fail. And so, mentioned Guyana and the bad Exxon deal. Even prior to Guyana's Exxon deal coming through, I always point out to people that Portuguese, which make up less than 1% of the Guyanese population in Guyana, they were taking home over 30% of Guyana's GDP. And so power still matters in all of these post-colonial situations, and power matters for regional institutions. Who has power in CARICOM? Western corporate interests, and the leaders are enacting or carrying out those interests under this guise of friendly diplomacy and development, versus who has power in ALBA, a Bolivarian alliance that is very aware of imperialism given its members, and also the fact that if they don't have any sort of economic cooperation, then they are relegating themselves to be dependent states within the capitalist system whose resources are exploited and then whose peoples are not developed.
Thank you. So this is 12:38. I want to thank all of the speakers for today. It was very insightful. Like I said, it's not enough conversations around these institutions that would be useful. And I'm really, really happy that we were able to start off African Liberation Month with this panel that talks about the entire African world and not just one aspect, but how all these things cross and intersect. Because the theme that we are borrowing from the A-APRP is same struggles. So this was very useful in understanding the ways that these all come together. And again, it is African Liberation Month, so I do want to remind folks that BAP has a plethora of events all month that you can check out on blackallianceforpeace.com/events page. May 10th in Baltimore, we'll be at Red Emma's talking about the Congo. DC on the 16th. We'll be having a webinar for members on what is the Global Fragilities Act that Peter had mentioned. DC on the 22nd will be in Sankofa Books. So there's a plethora of different events happening in different areas. Philly is doing something. So just look on the events page and you will hear about it. Or you will read about it rather. But thank you all once again for joining us for the neocolonial function of ECOWAS and CARICOM. Thank you to Comrade Imani, to Fatou, Tamanisha, and Peter for really grounding us and being brilliant as always. Yeah, forward ever, backward never, no compromise, no retreat.